Ads schmads. If you don't want ads, that's okay. Choose the Dave McWilliams Plus option on Apple Podcasts. And hey presto, no ads.
To understand the economy, you have to understand human nature.
This podcast is powered by Acast.
How you doing? It is New Year's Eve, the last day of the year. And John, let's look back on 2024. How's your head?
My head is banging.
I know, I can see. I'm looking at
banging.
you.
It's banging.
It's been
from illness and alcohol.
Illness and alcohol, and as the Americans say, happy holidays.
Yes.
You feel like saying, I want rid of the holidays. Yeah. I want to go back to work.
I want to go back to bed.
I want to go back to bed. Anyway, we are just about finished with what was a fascinating year. I think we are on maybe the 500th podcast or something, are we?
Oh, it's 500 and something now.
Yeah.
I've actually lost track, kind of.
Lost track of time. Lost track of everything. Well, I hope you had a lovely Christmas. I hope you didn't row too much with the families. And if you did, I hope you apologised by Stephen's Day, or Stephen's Day. And
there's always an extra S there.
There's always an extra S. What we're going to do, John, today is we're going to look back at the highlights, the events, the trends, the moments, maybe the top 5 from the Irish economy.
Okay.
To see what framed the Irish economy. But I want to first start with the major observation, which is the following. That this year reinforced yet again that the Irish economy is on a totally different trajectory to the European economies. And this is something that we have been grappling with ever since Mary Harney, you might remember her.
I do.
She came up with the expression, are we closer to Boston or Berlin? About 25 years ago. And that idea was, is the Irish economy more American, that happens to be in Europe, or more European that happens to have an American influence? And I think the evidence of the last 25 years is the latter, that we are an American economy grafted on to Europe rather than a European economy with a lot of American isms, right?
And therefore, 2025 could be the big changing year.
Well, let us look back before we look forward. You're
Indeed.
absolutely right. So what I'm thinking is, what explains the fact that the Irish rate of growth, revenue growth, dynamism, immigration, whatever you want to call it, right? All these signs of an economy that is sucking in resources. What explains that in contrast to what we're seeing in France, in Germany, in Italy, which are economies that are slow, revenues are slow, or Britain?
Yeah.
Great example. Britain's a country that's run out of money, right? Just run out of money.
Yeah,
okay?
yeah.
Now, for many years, I was prepared to think, oh, it's a one-off and it's different and we're just catching up. So there's a theory in economics called convergence, which is that poorer regions will grow faster until they converge with the average, and thereafter we slow down. So the idea is...
Explain that a little bit more.
So basically, when we first joined the European Union, right, Ireland's GDP per head was about half of Germany's. And there was this idea, and this was underpinned all the structural funds and the cohesion funds. You might remember these words from years ago, right?
Yeah.
That was basically giving money to us to catch up.
Yeah.
And the idea would be that we would catch up dramatically. And why would we catch up dramatically? Because the returns to labour and capital would be greater in the poorer country. So when you deployed new capital, you got a bigger bang for your buck. When you deployed new labour, you got a bigger bang from your buck. When you educated your workforce, you got a bigger bang for your buck. And that eventually you'd catch up with the Germans or the French or the Italians or whatever it happened to be, or the British, for example. We caught up with the British in 1997 and have been increasingly richer than them since then, right? The idea was that the growth rate would tailor off. So the sort of inbuilt dynamism of poverty and the acceleration of poor economies would get you to the average level, and then you'd be fine. Then you taper off and the job done. Now, that seems to have happened in Portugal. That seems to have happened in Spain, the poorer countries when they joined, like ourselves. Hasn't happened yet in Greece because they've had a very, very difficult time. But the general idea is that most of the southern and, in due course, Eastern European countries will catch up with Western Europe. And that is the sort of promise of the European Union. So that would have suggested, had we gone on that trajectory, that the Irish economy would have caught up with and then slowed down in tandem with the rest of Europe. But that hasn't happened. So in the last 25 years, and certainly in the last 15 or 12 years, the Irish economy continues to grow at a much stronger level. So the question is, why is that? And I think it is because we have one foot in America and one foot in Europe. So as I've always said, Ireland is a very sneaky position. We do better when Europe is doing bad, and we do worse when America's doing bad, right? And the reason is the following. When Europe's doing bad, the euro exchange rate falls against the dollar, and our interest rates remain very, very low, right? Which is the case at the moment. And this makes Ireland even more attractive for American investors. Why? Because we're cheaper. Now, that has been the case for the last 25 years. So it's not a coincidence that 25 years ago, at the beginning of this century, European and American incomes per head were about the same. And now the Americans are 25% richer, which is quite amazing. And the reason
That's quite a difference.
It's a huge difference, difference. And the reason is the American economy is much, much, much more dynamic. It's creating much more, it's always that question, where's the European Google? Where is it? Where is there a European?
And all the job rates reports, as we've been talking about throughout the year, have been, 200,000, 500,000, they've been on the upward trajectory.
The Americans are, despite Trump wanting to get rid of immigrants, Americans running out of people. Right, which is kind of amazing.
Yeah.
But if you look at, for example, new companies versus old companies, and that is probably your best indicator of entrepreneurial or commercial dynamism, what you see is European industry is still largely based on companies, particularly in Germany, that were formed in the last 10 years of the 19th century, which is kind of amazing. They're big German industrials, big chemical companies. These are all very, very old companies. We did a podcast, I think about a year ago, on what Andrea Binder, the German economist, called the industrial aristocracy in Germany. Same goes for Italy, broadly similar for France, and for Sweden, although Sweden's quite an interesting outlier. What you see in the United States is that the companies that were the top 10 companies in the Dow Jones Index 20 years ago are nowhere to be seen now. So they've all been taken. So the Americans have this revolutionary cycle of economic innovation all the time. And that's what drives them forward. Of course, what Ireland has done is it's piggybacked on that by being their outpost in Europe or being their outpost around the world. Now, we may well, and you're right, come on to this, is that game over?
It's
but the
not
point
really
is,
sustainable.
This last year reinforces that idea that Ireland is part of, I've said it before, Connecticut with shitty weather. We are part of the American world. Now, what comes with that is a certain amount of economic dynamism, which is a spin-off from the multinationals. But there's also, I think, in Ireland, a generation that is emerging, it has emerged in the last, let's say, there's 2 generations of kind of people who are having a go, who are setting up on their own, who are doing their own thing, right? That sort of optimism about the future is not necessarily reflected on the continent. So therefore, our politics are different, our economics are different. We are suffering from the problems of success. The continent suffers from the problems of failure. So the problems of failure are very low levels of revenue, very low growth rates, and a significant shift to the right politics, which is afraid of the Western
And just
world.
a lack of innovation.
Lack of innovation, lack of risk-taking.
They get tired. It feels like
They're tired, they're older. The big criticism of Europe, which I don't believe in, is, that it's an economic museum. It's a lovely place to retire, all that sort of thing. I think that European lifestyle, and on every metric, Europeans live longer, they weigh less,
Yes.
They have much lower rates of depression.
Yeah.
Much lower rates of urban violence. All these things that are absolutely crucial.
Yeah, but they seem to be on the rise, you know.
But in general, the European lifestyle is spectacularly better than the American lifestyle.
Nicer wine.
A lot nicer wine. Yeah. Nicer cheese.
Although I when I was in America the last time, I was in a wine shop.
Of course you were.
And I was
sleeping rough in a wine shop.
I was looking at all this wine and all the Californian wine. And I said to the guy, why is Californian wine so much more expensive than the French wine in America? This is in California. Yeah. And he goes, hey man, because it's so much better.
Well, just wait till Donny has put tariffs on everything.
Yeah. Donny, he has his own wine as well, actually.
It's a Trump wine, is he?
Yeah, Trump wine.
God, he doesn't even drink.
I'd say it would take paint off a gate.
Yeah, I know. It's a great expression. Anyway, what I'm saying is the growth rates, dynamism, all that stuff of Ireland, right, are the problems of success. We can't build things quick enough. We've too many people here. We've too much demand. There's too much money sloshing around.
Too many unions. That's what it is.
This is, by the way, John has a WhatsApp group, which informs him every now and then. And I think the WhatsApp group would be, it's fair to say, slightly to the right of centre.
It's a very funny group, I have to say.
It is.
Anyway, put that WhatsApp aside. What are the main things that happen? Give us your 5 big trends of 24 then.
Okay, I think
might give us an indication
Ireland,
where we're headed for 25.
For Ireland, we're going to stay with Ireland this next couple of minutes, right?
Yeah.
Okay, the surge in the corporation tax has been an event that has dramatically changed the revenue stroke fiscal outlook of Ireland, right? I'll give you a couple of figures. Irish corporation tax came in at 25 billion this year. That is about 30% of the total tax. Well, maybe a little less, maybe about 25% of the total tax take. In contrast, corporation tax in Britain is about 10%. So we are 2.5 times. We take in 2.5 times more than other countries, which is bizarre because we've got the lowest tax rate.
Yeah.
So that actually substantiates the Laffer curve idea that when you actually lower your tax rate, you generate more revenue.
Sorry, the Laffer curve.
No, so Laffer curve was something that was believed by Ronnie Reagan, which was the, let's say it was the red rag to the left-wing bull. Okay.
Right.
So this guy, Laffer, called Arthur Laffer, an economist who I've met actually.
Right, okay.
Yeah, a very enthusiastic man. It's an unusual fella. He came up with this idea.
I love that. Unusual fella in inverted commas.
Yeah, an unusual chap. But he came up with this and he wrote it on the back of almost an envelope for Ronnie Reagan. And the Laffer curve postulated that as you cut tax rates, your tax revenue actually increases because more and more people stop evading tax and are prepared to pay the tax, and you generate more income, and you generate more dynamism, and and up it goes. Now, this was very, very much the holy grail of supply-side economics. It was very much what drove the 1980s, 1990s in the United States and their view that we should cut tax and generate revenue. Now, this was something that left of centre people found very, very hard to accept because, number one, on the left, they believe that taxation should be redistributive. So the higher the tax, the more equal the society.
Yeah.
But what these Americans were saying, no, the higher the tax, the more likely you are to strangulate the economy and the more likely you are to end up having less and less tax revenue. And the more likely you are to have people evading tax, for example.
Well, I suppose it depends on the state of the economy as well, and the number of the unemployment number and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, but they were saying, I'm going to use the word ceteris paribus, John. Ceteris paribus is the great get-out clause on all economics. It means other things.
I'm talking bollocks.
Yeah. No, you're not. You're not. Actually, ceteris paribus is actually more bollocks than anything you've ever talked in your life, right? It means other things being equal, right? If you study economics, one of the great, as I said, get-out clauses of economics is ceteris paribus, which basically means let's forget reality. Let's pretend all those other things aren't happening, other things being equal, and then let's make this ridiculous assumption.
Right.
This is, again, we're unpacking the nonsense of classical economics here, right?
Yeah.
So Laffer, on the other hand, said, look, you know what? I think if you cut taxes, you'll generate revenue. What has happened in Ireland on the corporation tax is a sort of a transnational version of the Laffer tax. So the surge in corporation tax is significant. Not only, and I'm going to talk a bit about this in a second, the Apple tax idea, right? The tax rebate, etc., but just the general idea that lots and lots of money, corporation tax money, has come to Ireland. Now, that has pissed off two large constituencies. The first constituency is the MAGA crowd in America.
Yeah.
The MAGA crowd in America very much want to get their American money back. We talked about Howard Lutnick.
Yes, the CEO
of Cantor Fitzgerald, who is now the Treasury Secretary. And he's basically saying, I want our money back, right? Where we are most exposed in the future is in the pharmaceutical industry. And the reason is the following. The pharmaceutical industry in Ireland makes drugs in Ireland and sells them back to America. So it's quite different to the other multinationals. Most of the other multinationals make stuff here, sell them to Europe. The tax that is generated in Europe comes to Ireland. The Americans don't give a shit about that.
Yeah.
Right? What Donny wants is stuff that is made outside of America that is sold in America. And that's what he can put tariffs on. And that's why our pharmaceutical industry is particularly exposed to MAGA, you know? And the second part of this is that if you were the chief executive of an American pharmaceutical company and you think, okay, if I am making my product in Ireland, I will be subject to tariffs. Why not make my product in Idaho, where I'll be subject to no tariffs?
Yeah.
So the chances of the pharmaceutical industry responding to the MAGA doctrine by leaving Ireland or not maybe leaving Ireland, but investing less in Ireland, I think that's quite high in the year ahead.
So the Viagra market is going to go a bit limp.
Certainly after Christmas, John. So as John is doling out little blue pills over there, he's jumping on them. You know, whatever it takes, man. You're amongst friends. It's okay.
But seriously, though, that is one of the biggest drugs that's been sold out of Ireland, manufactured and sold out of Ireland.
Yeah.
So if they up sticks and went back to
Idaho, blue pills in Idaho.
Yeah,
not in Ringaskiddy. That's where they're all made. Ringaskiddy, the Viagra center of the world. But those big pharmaceutical industries are at risk.
Yeah.
And when I look at the surge in corporation tax, I think, hold on a second. Pharmaceutical drug makers selling drugs back to America is a weakness in a new MAGA world.
Okay.
So that's the first thing.
Okay. So what else is going on then?
Well, I think the second big review of the year, you have to talk about the Apple tax. It's in the same area.
Yeah.
So the Apple tax is the great one about the government that didn't want to free 13 billion. Did you hear about the government that didn't want to free 13 billion, right? So what was happening there was basically the European Commission. This shows the other side of the multinational. So the first side in the pharma is how you're pissing off the Americans. The second side is how you really are pissing off the Europeans. So the Europeans, through the European Court of Justice, so the highest court in Europe, found Ireland guilty of tax evasion, right? That's as simple as that. They found us guilty of giving Apple a favorable taxation deal, right? Which was basically cooking the books and undermining the rest of Europe. And it confirmed that that little scam between 2003 and 2014 amounted to about 13 billion in unpaid taxes by Apple. Now, of course, what this suggests was Ireland was just caught rapping. Just caught.
Yeah.
And so the government spent all of its time pretending this wasn't happening. And then, so I remember talking to an English friend of mine and they were saying, no, so you've got 13 billion and you don't want it.
Yeah.
And you have a housing problem.
Yeah.
And you have an infrastructure problem. And you've got to build metros and you've got to build trains. So that's, I think, what that has put us on is a sort of collision course with Europe. And I think what the next phase of Ireland's relationship with Europe, prior to this last few years, Ireland was really regarded as a good corporate citizen, nice guys, Irish pubs, we chat away, very good at diplomacy. Don't forget, we got the Europeans on side on Brexit. The whole European Union came with us. And I think a lot of them are saying, like, hold on a second. We actually downed tools and sided with you against Britain, when it's in our economic interest to really side with Britain because it's a much bigger country.
Yeah.
But we actually put on the green jersey and we sided with you. Now you're running these little grubby operations that are robbing our taxes.
So what can they do? What like it's all done and sorted and settled now, but what's the outcome for this?
It changes the background noise about Ireland's position. And again, small countries really need friends. That's, big countries don't really need friends. Small countries really need friends. Small countries join bigger clubs in order to have access to markets, lower cost of capital, all that sort of, even just basic influence, right? As I've always said, if you're a small country and you are not at the top table, you're typically on the menu.
Yeah.
In the sense that somebody's going to eat you up, right?
Yeah.
So I think in a way we have probably got close to the limits of European tolerance for what is in effect, from their perception, a tax haven. Now we've kind of got away with it because we're part of the OECD's, 15% block and all that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
Our tax system. But as a general rule, there's a lot of people on the continent who are not that happy.
I'm actually quite surprised that they're not demanding Ireland to put more into the defence. Because Ireland, from a geographical perspective and from a defence perspective, is the weak link of Europe. And we've had the Russian boats up and down the coast for the past year, all the way through 24. They've been up, observing and surveying, and who knows what they're up to. And we've got one boat.
I know. But I've always thought, the NATO discussion, which is going to emerge, because basically once the Americans stop paying, which Trump has said they're going to stop paying as early as tomorrow for NATO, right? Or whenever he gets in, the 6th of January, whatever, right? Then that bill will come to Germany, France, Italy, all of whom, as I said a minute ago, are constrained by less revenue.
Yeah.
And we're free riding over here saying we're grand and we go out in this idea of we're neutral and we're this and we're so nice. Eventually, they're going to get pissed off, right? And that's going to get doubly pissed off when the Americans stop paying the bill. Because why would the British pay for our defence?
Yeah,
absolutely. When we're a richer country.
Yeah.
And we have a massive budget surplus. Although, given that we can't build a Lewis, imagine trying to build an army here.
Big aircraft carrier.
A proper army. But I think you're right. I think we're moving into, these are sort of sacred cows of the Irish sort of political hinterland that, we are neutral and we can be, I've always felt that neutrality is like cowardly policy. I think you have to take sides. I think you have to stand up for yourself.
Yeah, it's just debatable. I mean, maybe we'll save that one for another day.
But I think that.
But I think the demand is going to be there. The
demand is going to be there, and it's going to be a significant showdown in Ireland in the future. Do we have a defence policy? Up until now, we've based on everybody else, but I think you're right. I think that's coming to an end.
Okay, so on to number 3 then.
Well, on number 3 is just this weird idea of the economy that continues to grow.
Yeah.
And grow and grow and grow. So tax revenue, 105 billion this year, making a 20% increase in taxes across the board. So income tax, VAT, corporation tax. It's a phenomenal achievement. The economy is employing more people than ever before. The problem with this, of course, is that we need to spend this money, right? And the dilemma is we are run, there's a thing called the Fiscal Council, which is a bunch of economists who seem to think that prudence, we've done this before, is the road to salvation. But prudence only makes sense if you don't have a requirement to spend. So if you, for example, like Norway, right? Yeah. Like the Norwegians have a static economy, static population, they've built their infrastructure. I flew to Oslo. There's a high-speed train from Oslo airport right into the center of Oslo, all that sort of stuff, right? So it makes sense for them to be setting aside money for the future. It makes sense for us to be setting aside some money for the future, but not as much as we are. And the reason is that if you do not build when your economy is growing, disparity between people's standard of living and quality of life increases dramatically. And this is a huge thing, right? So standard of living is an economistic notion of prices, aggregates, this sort of stuff, X income per head, right? Quality of life is what that delivers. Quality of life is it, are you commuting all the time? Are you stuck in your car? Do you have public infrastructure? Can you get to the airport or whatever you happen to be on time? Do you have a proper metro system? Can you buy a house in an area that is accessible by public transport into the city? Can you buy a house at all?
Yeah.
Does the public service provide houses at a reasonable cost in the right place for the right place? This is all quality of life stuff. So at the moment, Ireland has a very high standard of living and a quality of life that is not consistent with that. So how do you fix that? You build public infrastructure. And if you hide behind prudence,
Yeah.
you're just being a coward. Because, spending money requires choices. Spending public infrastructure requires choices. It's so much easier to say, oh, don't worry, we'll just save it.
Yeah.
But we've plenty of savings. We've 100 billion. The reason Ireland has a massive, massive current account surplus is because we have a massive saving over investment. We save
We also have
more.
a huge amount of debt.
We have a large amount of debt. As a percentage of GDP, it's very, very small. It's about 58%. So it's one of the smallest in Europe.
Okay.
So debt isn't our problem at the moment. I mean, if interest rates were to go up dramatically, then public debt would become a problem. There's no doubt of that, because you'd be spending more of your daily income to pay your interest rate on your previous debts.
Yeah.
And of course, there's a problem with using GDP because GDP overstates our income and all that stuff. But as a general rule, our public debt is, in comparison to the rest of Europe, not really a problem, because the actual income that we're generating is considerably more than the rate of interest.
Yeah.
If the rate of interests were higher than our income levels, then we'd have a problem. But we don't have that yet. But what we do have is an inability of the state to actually deliver. It's called state competence. We don't have that. And I think 2024 was the year where state competence, again, came under the spotlight, and it did not pass any tests at all.
Okay, let's just pause there for a second, and we'll come back and we'll talk about the election, centrist dads, and...
Centrist dads, John. The victory of the centrist dad. We are in the ascendancy.
Along with Taylor Swift. So, Mark, we've been through the corporate tax rate, the Apple tax debacle, and government competency.
Yeah, government, state ability. State ability. Yeah.
So what are the other key issues?
So what we keep talking about is an economy with loads of demand and not enough supply. And nowhere is this more evident than in house prices, because we can't build enough bloody houses quickly enough. Again, look, house prices in Ireland up 10% last year. Up in Dublin about 10.8%, about 9% outside Dublin. The median price of a house, right? And the median price is the crucial one, is 345,000. So that is the house right in the middle.
Yeah.
So if you take all the expensive ones and all the cheaper ones, the house price right in the middle is the median. You'll be pleased to know we mentioned your cousin in Longford. Longford is the cheapest place in Ireland to live. At 175 grand, you can get a gaff in Longford, whereas the most expensive area is Dunleary.
God.
Dunleary, where we live, the median house price is 635,000 euros. I mean, it's phenomenally
That's outrageous.
expensive. Yeah, it is. And things aren't improving. For example, the middle of last year, the number of homes on the market was 10,500 available to buy.
Right.
That was a 24% decrease from the year before. So what is happening is, not only is there a decrease in the number of homes, but there's a massive increase in the population.
Yeah.
Largely from immigration.
Yeah.
Legal immigration. So the immigrants that are being given visas to come and work here because we need them. And as long as you have this disparity between house supply and house demand, I mean, again, economists always talk about immigrants as numbers, when immigrants come, they're not numbers, they're people.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, of course.
And
yeah.
they're families, and they have to live somewhere, right? And they have to live, and of course, then they're in competition with the locals. And this is why you get what I would suspect we're going to get a shift to the right in the next government on the issue of immigration, because the centrist dads will move.
Well, that's where we
will
will be in step with Europe, because Europe is shifting to the right.
Absolutely. And that brings us to the election, right?
Yeah.
Now, it was quite funny. Ireland was shouting and roaring, and the Shinner was going mad, and they said, change. And then Ireland went to the election on the 29th of November, and people said, meh.
Yeah.
Change.
Well,
I'm not sure.
Change.
Yeah, people they're in emphatic, I'm grand.
Yeah.
Right. So that's quite interesting, the return.
But there wasn't a proper alternative. As we spoke about before, there was a blancmange in the middle, unless you were going to go mad extremists, which wouldn't work anyway.
Which wouldn't work. And the interesting thing is the very extreme right, the idea of the anti-immigration stuff, they got nothing. I mean, most of them lost their deposits.
Yeah.
Right. And that is quite interesting. So it means, but I think what we're not capturing is only 60% of the electorate voted.
Yes.
So there is a big insider-outsider idea here. And the insiders voted, and they voted back the insider parties, and I'm all right, Jack.
Yeah.
But there is a big outsider vote of people who didn't even turn up to vote. And that, I think, is where there is a potential for the political process to not reflect the actual mood of the nation.
Yeah.
So at the moment, everybody on the inside is saying, look, it's grand. We voted Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, bit of Labour, it's going to be basically more of the same.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Whereas I think what we should be talking about is that big chunk of the population that didn't even come out to vote, that couldn't be arsed voting, that feel they don't want to vote now.
But they had no one to vote for. That's my point, is that there wasn't an alternative. They couldn't bring themselves to go with the same old.
But they couldn't vote for the Shinners if they wanted. They could vote Sinn Féin.
Maybe they didn't want. Maybe Sinn Féin has too much baggage.
Maybe it has, or they could have voted for, I mean, this is the interesting thing. They could have voted for the assorted left, but they didn't bother. But where we are at, John, is that the centrist dads rule the roost very, very much to the chagrin of the more left and the more right, who would regard the centre as the worst possible place to be. Let's just see how it works out. We have a government now for 5 years. It's a long time.
Yeah. See if they survive.
Well, a lot of people would say, you know what? It's the Einstein idea. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. There is an element of that.
Yeah.
Basically, this is the I'm all right, Jacks. I'm the insiders. We're doing well. We have our houses. We have our this, that, and the other. We have our pensions, all that sort of stuff. And all the while, younger Irish people feel betrayed. They feel let down. They feel elbowed out of not so much the labour market, but the housing market. And they feel that, go back to that idea, their quality of life is not commensurate with their education and their expectations, or even the income.
That's why they're all heading off.
That's one of the reasons they're all heading off. I think a lot of people are heading off also just because that's what you do when you're in your 20s. You head off, I don't think there's a direct, absolute correlation between house prices and the way people head off. But I think it's all in the mix.
Yeah.
And the final and most important issue,
John,
of the economy in 2024 was Swiftonomics. The impact of Taylor Swift on the Irish economy.
Go on.
Which was substantial. She is now...
Was it substantial?
Yeah, I'll give you a few numbers, right? Taylor Swift Eras Tour. 3 sold-out gigs in Dublin's Croke Park, 160,000 fans, generating 20 million in ticket sales alone for these gigs, right?
I missed it, actually. I would have loved to have seen the show.
Massive, massive influx of concert goers, increased spending on travel, accommodation, booze, food, hotels, occupancy at 98%.
Wow.
Average room prices, 350 quid a night. I mean, a complete rip-off. But I thought this was interesting. The Bank of Ireland found that spending amongst 13 to 17-year-olds soared by 63% in comparison with the previous weekend, when Taylor wasn't knocking around.
That was the centrist dads spending the money.
That's the centrist dads spending the money on the things.
Yeah.
Amongst 18 to 25-year-olds, spending up 25%. And Those who should know better. Those between 26 and 35 increased by 30%.
Right.
So this is an extraordinary phenomenon, which is the impact of one megastar on the underlying economy.
It was just party weekend.
Party weekend. So the takeaway, John, of the 2024 economic hinterland is Swiftonomics and the economics of leisure, innocuous, middle of the road, non-radical, centrist music, centrist aspirations, reinforcing the centrist political ideas. Now the question for the future, John, does this mark peak centrism and after this it atrophies, or is this a solidified trend that will go on? And that will be the question that we will grapple with in 2025.